I am Linda Mangiero, and I am moderating this session, and my co-moderator is Jim McDonald. And as you know, it's a tradition at the American Academy meeting that they always save the best speakers and the best moderators for last. So here we are. So to begin, I'd like to introduce Dr. Joseph Sistino. Hails from the Medical University of South Carolina. He's the director of perfusion education program for more than 40 years, with 40 years of perfusion experience. He is a fellow of pediatric perfusion, and he won the Perfusionist of the Year award from AMSECT in 2015. Joe has authored more than 60 publications and has over 100 national presentations related to cardiopulmonary bypass. His primary research interests, though, include long-term outcomes following neonatal surgery and the use of a simulator for perfusion education. So help me welcome Joe Sistino to the podium.
Thank you, Linda. It's really a great honor to be here and go over my topic today. I've had the opportunity to present at a lot of Academy meetings, but when Linda asked me to do this topic, I really got excited about the information that I found out, and I hope to share that with you today. How do I advance? Okay. So I have no disclosures, but you know what? I wish I did, okay? And because if I had a lot of grant funding, I would have a lot of disclosures, okay? And that's what this topic's about. But the other disclosure is really, I don't want to minimize any of the research that the students do, the clinical perfusionists do, all the people that do presentations at perfusion meetings, submit for publications. I mean, it's so important in this field. What I'm talking about today is more the future of the field and how to get funded research. And so my outline today is I'm going to talk about the process for conducting scientific research in most professions, medical professions. And I'm going to go through NIH grants related to perfusion, not necessarily done by perfusionists, but relate to perfusion, and actually will predict the future of perfusion. And how do we enhance research in our own profession? So this is one definition of a scientific research. But the way I look at it is more of a research cycle. You have a clinical problem, a clinical issue that you're trying to solve, and then you create a research agenda. And a research agenda could be a number of projects related to the same topic. Eventually, those results come out. They get incorporated into clinical guidelines. You get a group of experts together to review review those papers, find the best papers, see which ones have similar outcomes. Sometimes you can't find research, and that brings up research gaps. That shows you where the research should be in the future. Finally, you use those clinical guidelines on your patients. You see patient outcomes, you review that, and that feeds back to the critical issues that you need to continue to study. So it's kind of like the Krebs cycle for research. Donnie Lukoski, which many of you know, he was instrumental in helping to start the International Consortium for Evidence-Based Practice for Perfusion. And as he said, it will be the responsibility of profession at large. It's hard for me to read this here. Oh my God. Yeah, let me bring this up. I'm sorry. The monitor is really small. It will be the responsibility of the profession at large, once these areas have been identified, to prioritize and subsequently fill these gaps with new and sound research. So the consortium, one of their ideas is that they identify gaps in the perfusionists as a literature as they're trying to write guidelines, and that feeds the new research. So if perfusion is a profession, why is scientific research important? Well, this one definition says that a profession professes special knowledge and skills in a widely recognized body of knowledge or learning derived from research, education, and training at a high level. So in most medical professions or health professions, researchers have backgrounds ranging from basic science to clinical specialties. There are teams often made, which are translational, meaning they have members that do bench-side work, bench-side studies, bench to bedside, clinicians, statisticians, and those teams are very important in conducting research. Many academic medical centers, the researchers have clinical specialty and a PhD. And as being part of a university, they have academic requirements. They must submit research proposals in order to maintain their position or get a promotion. And many universities have an upper out policy, and if you don't get promoted with a number of years, it varies, but average probably like 6 or 7 years, then you're terminated. So if we look at another profession and look outside perfusion, try and learn from what other professions have done, we can use physical therapy as an example. 25 years ago, physical therapy is where we are today. They did not have a lot of researchers. But over the last 25 years, they've trained a number of researchers to improve rehabilitation medicine. And they have a large number of funded grants. And recently, they devised a research agenda for physical therapy. So that research agenda identifies the important areas that need to be researched in physical therapy. And the NIH, when they fund research projects, it's kind of linked to their research agenda, so that when they submit research projects, the NIH is aware of it, and the NIH has priorities too. So their research agenda is linked to the NIH, and NIH looks at their research agenda. So there's some coordination between it, and that helps younger researchers who are just coming out of school and starting to do research in their field to know where to focus their research and how to be successful. So it's not like somebody just comes with an idea like, I want to do a research project on this. It's just they have an agenda. They have a very coordinated process for identifying important research problems in their field, and then the research grants are written based on that. So in perfusion, what do? And I'm not minimizing this at all. We're a very young field. We don't have a lot of researchers. We have a lot of clinicians. But I'm talking about the future, where we should go in the future. First of all, we have very few grant-funded research, and I'm going to go through the NIH grants today related to perfusion, and there's very few. There are a couple that I'm not going to cover today, but I know there are a couple somewhat related to perfusion, but it's very few and far between. So most research that we do is conducted as part of another research project, or maybe as part of academic requirements in a program, perfusion school. Most graduate level programs have a requirement for research. And generally our research involves new techniques or therapies or testing of equipment, and recently there's been an increase in the use of database to look at outcomes. So why do we not have a lot of grant-funded research? Well, it's pretty obvious. We don't have a lot of clinicians with terminal degrees, such as a PhD. And grant funding has become more competitive. All researchers are experiencing reduced success in getting grants. And the strategic vision for the Heart and Lung Institute of the NIH is very broad in scope and very minimally applies to perfusion. So this is the strategic vision for the Heart and Lung Blood Institute. And if you go through the 8 objectives, the only one that I think that maybe relates to perfusion is develop and optimize novel diagnostic and therapeutic strategies to prevent, treat, and cure heart, lung, and blood diseases. So there's not a lot of opportunity here in terms of trying to meet the objectives of their strategic vision, which is what they use to make decisions on funding grants. So NIH appropriations has increased over the last 5 or 7 years. This goes up to 2015. But because of inflation, the actual dollars that are being appropriated for grant funding is actually going down because biomedical technology, the cost of biomedical technology is increasing. Even though we don't have a lot of inflation in our economy, the cost of biomedical technology is increasing, so it costs more and more money to do research. And this shows the success rates of grants over a bunch of years starting from the 1990s. And you can see the success rate has gone from about 25% down to about 19% of grants that get submitted. But I don't know if you can see this, but there's a couple of different, these are all the institutes from the NIH, and the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, the National Cancer Institute, and the National Institute for Aging have the highest award amounts, total award amounts. but the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute has one of the highest success rates, almost it's 24.2%. So when I showed this to my chair in my department, who is a physical therapist, he said 24%. Wow, that's really low-hanging fruit. You know, like you can really be successful. That's pretty easy compared to what we're up against. Some of the success rate, like cancer, is about 10%. So what you could do this yourself is go on NIH Reporter and look for research grants, see what's out there. And that's what I did. I typed in cardiopulmonary bypass and I typed in ECMO. And I came up with 65 grants that had the word cardiopulmonary bypass in it and 24 grants that had the word ECMO in it. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will go through quite a few of them. And these are the categories that I put them into to make it a little bit more digestible. Hemostasis, neurological protection, nitric oxide, oxygenation, monitoring. I included surgical techniques. It's kind of funny, the cardiopulmonary bypass comes up in those two papers because it says we'll eliminate cardiopulmonary bypass, so that's how it came up in those two. But I do want to mention those. Expansion of ECMO, ventricular assist devices, and lung assist. And some of you in the audience may be aware of some of these research projects because they're in your institution. These are projects that were funded in 2017, so they're probably just starting right now. They may be continuation of other projects, but the money has been allocated and the projects are starting now. So this is at the University of Virginia, and they're actually looking at developing artificial platelets. And their aim is to understand how platelets interact with various stages of coagulation. And the second aim is to explore in vivo function of platelet-like particles, the augmentation of hemostasis in multiple models of trauma-associated coagulopathy. How cool would that be to have artificial platelets? So this award is for $662,000, not a small amount of money to investigate this. We talked about HIT yesterday. This chemical company, which is, I think it's near Philadelphia, Fox Chase, they are developing, the first part talks about the incidence of HIT. 20 to 50% have risk of developing new thrombotic events. We're familiar with that. Mortality rate, 20%. So they've discovered a novel approach to the treatment of HIT via the destabilization of the functionally active PF4 to inactivate those monomers and this ultra-large complex. So they've come up with an antagonist to prevent the HIT. And so that would be something to really look forward to in the future. So they have almost $1 million to bring that to fruition. University of Colorado is working on a grant to treat global cerebral ischemia. They say there's primary reasons are drowning, suffocation. They also heart bypass surgery they include in that indication. However, the most result from cardiac arrest. About 60% of survivors after cardiac arrest have long-lasting moderate to severe cognitive impairments. And their studies, they have already identified inhibitors in mouse that showed high therapeutic potential. And these inhibitors were injected IV after cerebral ischemia and showed dramatic improvement. Such improvement was also seen over the therapeutic hypothermia alone. And when both treatments were combined, only residual and barely detectable neurological injury was seen. Some of these studies are just amazing. If these things are actually occurring, then there's a lot of hope out there for the things that we face on a daily basis. So this is a big area. I don't know how many people are familiar with the concept of monitoring cerebral autoregulation. There's been a number of studies since 2009, and there are 4 studies here that are going to be conducted on cerebral autoregulation. Cerebral autoregulation, the idea is to determine a threshold, a minimum threshold for cerebral autoregulation and a maximum threshold. And they do this by combining cerebral oximetry with either a pressure measurement, correlating that with a pressure measurement, or a flow measurement. Now, in this study at Mass General, they're using diffuse correlation spectroscopy, which is a flow measurement This at Tufts University. They're going to be using it in a model of diabetic patients during hemodialysis, also trauma patients, and also eventually cardiopulmonary bypass. At Mass General, they're doing a study on cardiopulmonary bypass, and Dr. Hogue, who was at Johns Hopkins and did a lot of the development work, is now at Northwestern, and he's also doing a study using Doppler. So this is some technology that we will be using, I believe, in the very near future. Instead of just monitoring cerebral oxygenation, we will also be able to determine minimum and the high level of autoregulation is above the upper limit of autoregulation associated with delirium in adult studies. So we need to I think sometime in the future, not too far, we'll have some way to look at autoregulation. At Duke, they're looking at cognitive effects of body temperature during hypothermic circulatory arrest. And this is interesting from University of Michigan. They're trying to develop a electrochemical generator for nitric oxide. Current methods to generate nitric oxide are very expensive, and this electrochemical generator will be used to develop, to manufacture nitric oxide and also monitor the level of it. Mass General will be doing a study. I don't know if Kenny is here, but he knows about this possibly, but they're going to be doing a study on prolonged hemolysis and nitric oxide during bypass, administering, they're going to be randomizing 250 patients to two groups. One group will receive nitric oxide during bypass and through the mechanical ventilator, and then the other group won't, and they're going to be looking at outcomes after that with kidney injury. Also, nitric oxide, MC3, in Michigan is looking at non-thrombogenic antiseptic nitric oxide releasing catheters. So there are a number of studies related to nitric oxide, which is what I'm going into right now. And one of them is to look at venous catheter, a dual lumen venous catheter for ECMO that releases nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is associated with inhibiting platelet adhesion, preventing thrombus formation, and also inflammatory response. This is also interesting in the area of oxygenation. They're developing a protein that can deliver oxygen, and this protein is going to be used in pediatric bypass to deliver oxygen to the myocardium. Another way, I'm sure everybody's going to be interested in this one. This is kind of a slow funding, $73,000. But at the University of Pittsburgh, they're looking at some type of active membrane for oxygen transport that doesn't involve microporous membranes. And they say that this active membrane generates it agitates the laminar surface stream, eventually making a quantum leak in gas exchange. This cross streams carry mass transfer of oxygen to the membrane on magnitude of orders faster than molecular diffusion, almost like a conveyor belt. So maybe, we won't be using microporous oxygenators forever. There might be something coming up down the road for that. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but peritoneal ventilation for acute respiratory distress. Oxygen microbubbles are less expensive and higher oxygen carrying capacity than other fluorocarbons that were out previously. And they're showing in a small animal model for ARDS that peritoneal ventilation is a promising therapy for severe hypoxemia. So this is the first. They have two hypotheses, and they're going to measure the transfer of oxygen, and then they're going to use it in a hypoxia in a rat model of ARDS. We had a really excellent lecture yesterday on lactate levels and cutoff values for lactate levels. This company is working on a continuous sensor for reading of lactate in the ICU. It will last up to 7 days. It also incorporates nitric oxide releasing materials so that it prevents blockages of the catheter. And they're going to use it in infants. And I'm sure everybody's going to love this. Real-time monitoring of blood viscoelasticity. Imagine having an ACT test that was in line. This project uses optical fiber technology that will integrated with existing vascular access devices to measure coagulation and anticoagulation. So they're trying to develop a way to measure ACT online. University of Central Florida. North Shore University is looking at intrarenal oxygenation as a marker for risk of AKI. And they show that renal oxygenation changes occur much earlier than any other marker. Most other markers take about 48 hours. So they're using it in contrast, patients that receive contrast during procedures. So in the future, we might be monitoring urine PO2. How exciting is that? University of Florida is working on cytokine filtering. They use some type of magnetic rare earth magnets which produce exceptionally high magnetic field gradients, and it removes 90% of interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor. So they do that in a pig model now, but maybe we will have some type of cartridge that we can use during bypass to remove, instead of just diluting patients and trying to remove volume. This from Medical University of South Carolina. I heard of them, and we did a study on corticosteroid therapy. Mayo Clinic is doing a study to compare trolley and taco in cardiac surgery patients. They're randomizing them to either a CATS device to wash the blood or not a non-CATS device, and they're going to look at the outcomes and the incidence of transfusion-related complications. So that would be interesting to see. They have $620,000 for that. Oh, this is a really interesting one. In a mouse model, did you know that blue light protects against ischemia-induced organ injury? I didn't at all. So blue light induces HMGB1 release and neutrophil influx. So, and it goes through the optic pathway. So mice experience optic nerve degeneration and are not protected. So in the future, we might be putting patients on bypass and have blue light going into their eyes to reduce inflammatory response. University of Michigan is looking to try and reduce mechanisms of no reflow after prolonged cardiac arrest. I think they should get together with the people at Denver and kind of figure that out together, because they're both looking at the same thing, global ischemia, and but they're looking at it a little differently. They're looking at using anticoagulation early, and they're looking at using leukocyte filtration. In Boston, they working on the cardioport to start doing intracardiac surgery, minimally invasive surgery on pediatric patients. Dr. Del Nito is working on that. And also, oops, wrong one. And Boston Children is also looking at doing valve repairs through the transapical, through the apex of the heart, using two-arm robotic catheter. They're going to reduce the number of robotic arms by incorporating some of the cameras on and reducing the number of instruments that they need, and they're going to do mitral valve repairs through the apex of the heart. So I don't know if those will be on or off bypass. I couldn't really tell. MC3 is working on an automatic perfusion system for ECPR, emergency ECMO, and they're already in the phase 3. They've already trained paramedical personnel for using this device. So we'll see where that ends up. But this project, so they're trying to develop a highly portable, compact, safe to use automatic perfusion system, which will automatically regulate blood flow, oxygen, CO2, and temperature. This is a grant from University of Michigan to train to look at patients coming into the hospital from out of hospital cardiac arrest, going into the emergency room, and they will be placed on ECPR, and so they're going to do a trial to look at outcomes related to that. Heartware has a $1.89 million grant. It looks like the next development of the Heartware will be a transapical pump that will have outflow across the aortic valve. And there are two companies that got grants to do that, Heartware and this other company, Perfusion Solutions. So seems like that might be the next generation of ventricular assist devices that are implanted in the left ventricle and then pump across the aortic valve. This is a catheter to use for Fontan patients. We heard about Fontan patients yesterday, so this is to support their venous circulation. This company has a $540,000 grant to develop a catheter for that. And Penn State's still working on a pediatric heart. They're working on a 12 ml stroke volume total artificial heart. And in Pittsburgh, they're working on an ambulatory assist lung. They got $1.4 million for that. And also Maryland, they're also working, they say they're going to be the first in human use of an artificial lung. So they should probably get together with Pittsburgh and finish developing that. So what does the future of bypass look like from all these studies? Well, first we will have some type of antagonist, PF4 antagonist, to use in HIT patients. We'll monitor mean arterial pressure during bypass in patient-specific autoregulation range. We'll know each patient's own upper and lower limit for autoregulation. We'll have new ways to deliver oxygen, active delivery membranes, maybe oxygen delivery proteins. We'll have catheters that will release nitric oxide, and I'm thinking maybe tubing at some point that release nitric oxide. Or we'll continuously use nitric oxide on bypass. We'll be filtering with cytokines, and our patients will have blue light placed over their eyes. We'll have inline monitoring of lactate and anticoagulation, and we'll be monitoring urine PO2. Surgical bleeding will be treated with platelet-like particles, and if we do end up with global ischemia, we will have treatments for that and to prevent the no reflow phenomenon. In ECMO and VADS, we'll have VADS through the LV apex. We'll have ECPR devices automated and eventually operated by EMTs outside the hospital. We'll have compact ambulatory lung assist devices, intraperitoneal oxygenation, oxygen delivery proteins, nitric oxide releasing catheters, cytokine filtering, and then treatment if we have cerebral ischemia, and everybody's going to have blue light. So here's where we are today. We have a lot of perfusion-related research that will be done by all these disciplines: surgeons, cardiologists, neonatologists, physiologists, biomedical engineers. But we need to have some kind of link to the NIH strategic vision if we want to have funded research. We have to have a perfusion agenda, and we need to develop researcher perfusionists rather than just perfusionists that are researchers, because it's really a full-time obligation to be a researcher. So this is where I see us right now. This is Bob Groom over here. There's Jeff Riley over here. This is me looking forward, and we're kind of floating around doing our own thing. But maybe some of you think this way. We're kind of being pushed around by the surgeons, the neonatologists, pushing towards the future. And this is where I'd like to see us steaming forward. We're up here with everybody else doing translational research and moving to improve our profession and our practice. So how do we get more funded research into perfusion? Well, first of all, we need to encourage perfusionists, clinical perfusionists, to be active in translational research already established at their institution, people that already have grants. Encourage younger perfusionists to increase their academic credentials. It takes years to develop research portfolio, so you have to start early in your career. And today there are many online opportunities to do that. Increase research skills in our students in terms of training, methodology, and statistics. And sometimes we should invite some of these funded researchers. How cool would it be to invite some of these funded researchers for these grants I just talked about to come here and present to us on some of the new technology that they're excited about. So some of you know I wrote this editorial a couple of years ago, and as we move towards the graduate level education, I think we'll have more and more people better prepared to do research in the field. So if you remember this movie, Back to the Future, your future is whatever you make it, so make it a good one. And I hope that I showed you today that our future is based on research today. Thank you.